Hi and welcome to this NPTEL course titled Trauma and Literature. We're looking at Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22. So we'll just continue from where we left last time. This is a section where we're looking at a medical condition which is described in very tragicomic terms through a lot of dark humor, through a very flippant mode of representation, which obviously makes the whole novel more cognitively complex, because the matter which is represented is very dark, is very serious, it's very medical. It's about people who are actually very, very ill, sick in the head, and they have different kind of symptoms. But the manner of representing that matter is obviously very different. There seems to be an incongruity between the matter and the manner. And I think this novel is a lot about incongruity, because this incongruity between matter and manner, this being out of sync between what is represented, how it is represented, it becomes the pointer to the larger spectacle of absurdity which this novel is trying to capture, which is obviously the event of the Second World War. The absurdity of the war, the futility of the war, the purposelessness of the war, and the larger meaninglessness of the war. Not just the physical meaninglessness, but also the metaphysical meaninglessness. Why is the war being fought in the first place? And almost everything is trivialized in this novel. Almost everything is, made into some kind of an anticlimax in this novel, made into some kind of a parody in this novel. And its constant production of parody and paradoxes makes this novel a very postmodernist one, but also a very flippant one, something which is very deliberately trying to be flippant in terms of representing a grand spectacle of violence. Now, this section, which should be on your screen, Major Sanderson and Yossarian are having a conversation, and Sanderson is trying to diagnose Yossarian. He's trying to give him the condition, describe his medical condition to him, and we see how this entire episode is relying on paradoxes. Entire communication is built on paradoxes, so to speak, and the paradoxes obviously produce humor, produce comicality in a certain sense, but also it's a kind of humor which makes the condition even darker in quality, because the fact that we are laughing about it means it is so hollowed out, means it is not even tragic anymore. And we did discuss this before. There seems to be some kind of a farcical quality about this, and in its very famous statement of Marx, first as tragedy, then as farce. And again, I mean, this is so tragic that it's been exhausted of its tragic quality. Now it's just become a routine, slapstick ritual. So this should be on the screen. And Major Sanderson is telling or talking to Yossarian, obviously in a very vindictive tone, but trying to be objective and clinical about it. And this is what he says. I'm not saying it because I hate you and want revenge. I'm not saying it because you rejected me and hurt my feelings terribly. No, I'm a man of medicine and I'm being coldly objective. I have very bad news for you. Are you man enough to take it? So the very first two sentences obviously reveal the mind of the Major Sanderson, and like we discussed last time, it's difficult to have the borders between the patient and the healer, because the doctors appears to be more needy psychologically than the patient. So that even that borderline is disturbed, even that borderline is blurred, where you don't quite know, who is the doctor, who is the healer, and who is getting healed. So the first two sentences where he's saying, "I'm not doing this because I hate you," the obvious implication, the obvious reading that we can take from this is, there is some personal hatred, some personal vendetta, some vindictive feeling. And there's also the fact that Yossarian had rejected him and hurt his feelings terribly, and then he sort of tries to undercut all that and say, I'm a man of medicine and I'm being coldly objective. I have very bad news for you. Are you man enough to take it? Now, when you have a question like this, are you man enough to take it? It almost is a rhetorical question. The expected answer is yes. Just tell us what the condition is, and I will do my best to praise it. Are you man enough to take it is a rhetorical question. But look at the way in which that common rhetorical question, that common rhetorical strategy is deconstructed in this novel through another production of Paradox, where Yossarian says, "God, no," screamed Yossarian, "I'll go right to pieces." Okay, so of course I'm not man enough to take it. I'll just, fly to pieces. I will just, splinter into smithereens. I'll just break down. I will cry. So obviously I'm not man enough. So that whole idea of this military masculinity is being parodied to a certain extent. Major Sanderson flew instantly into a rage. Can't we even do one thing right? He pleaded, turning beet red with vexation and crashing the sides of both fists down upon his desk together. The trouble with you is you think you're too good for all the conventions of society. You probably think you're too good for me too, just because they arrived at puberty late. Well, do you know what you are? You are a frustrated, unhappy, disillusioned, undisciplined, maladjusted young man. Right? So again, we find that the rage of the doctor is more revealing of the doctor's psyche in terms of, he seems to be more needy, he seems to be more violent, he seems to be more, in need for, medicine, in need for treatment. So he just loses his grip over everything, and he just screams at Yossarian, saying that, you think you're too good for me, you're always snubbing me, you are undercutting me, you're deconstructing me, you're decimating my logic all the time, just because I arrived at puberty late. And this whole idea of late puberty, something we discussed last time as well, he seems to flag it up all the time, and it's sort of strange because it's something that he thinks had made him an anxious person, something that he thinks had made him a incomplete person for a long time, and just instead of not talking about it, he's always flagging it up, which obviously means that he's very fragile. There's a lot of fragility in his mind about his masculinity, about his puberty. And then there's a series of adjectives, it's like a volley of adjectives directed at Yossarian, where he says you're unhappy, you're frustrated, you're disillusioned, you're undisciplined, you're maladjusted. So, all the things that, he directs at Yossarian. And again, the obvious expectation, the general expectation is Yossarian would refute it, would defend himself. He would say, no, I'm not that. But what does it say instead? Yes, sir, Yossarian agreed carefully. I guess you're right. Of course I'm right. You're immature. You'll be unable to adjust the idea of war. Yes, sir. You have a morbid aversion to dying. You probably resent the fact that you are at war and might get your head blown off any second. I'm more than resented, sir. I'm absolutely incensed. So there seems to be almost some kind of a Oscar Wilde quality about this. There's a lot of humor, a lot of paradox, a lot of epigrammatic wit. Epigrammatic obviously means something which is supposed to shock you, a reversal of logic, a logic reversal. So the doctor is saying you resent the idea of dying, and then Yossarian is saying I'm incensed by it, I'm infuriated by it, I'm more than resented. You have deep-seated survival anxieties, and you don't like bigots, bullies, snobs, or hypocrites. Subconsciously, there are many people you hate, right? So again, he's trying to appropriate the Freudian vocabulary. He says that you don't like bigots, you don't like bullies, you don't like snobs, you don't like hypocrites, and you hate them subconsciously. And again, Yossarian's response is very paradoxical. He says, consciously, sir, consciously, Yossarian corrected in an effort to help. I hate them consciously. There's nothing subconscious about my hatred of bullies and bigots. I hate them very, very consciously. Right, so again, this is sort of parodying the Freudian vocabulary that the doctor is trying to appropriate over here. You're antagonistic to the idea of being robbed, exploited, degraded, humiliated, or deceived. Misery depresses you, ignorance depresses you, persecution depresses you, violence depresses you, slums depress you, greed depresses you, crime depresses you, corruption depresses you. It wouldn't surprise me if you're a manic depressive. Now, look at the, this obviously is a very, very serious session, almost like a therapy session, but look at the adjectives, look at the nouns over here. Associated with depress. So this is about depression, ostensibly on the surface, but the things that depress Yossarian are things which are despicable in the first place. Poverty is something that depresses people, and so this seems to be some kind of a medical analysis, but what it ends up being is a commonplace, a cliche, it's a platitude. Right, so the production of paradox is also the production of platitude, commonplace, right? Something which is very common, something which is a cliche, something which is just there, right? Platitude. So ignorance, persecution, slums, greed, crime, all these things depress you. So you're manic depressive. Now, this combination of manic depression, which is a medical terminology, a medical classification, with resentment against things which are despicable in the first place. That combination is obviously creating some kind of a comic effect over here, but it also, at a larger level, it also shows the innate incongruity of medical treatment, the innate incompletion and inadequacy of the medical treatment over here, right? So this is supposed to be a therapist, this is supposed to be a doctor, and the voice of the doctor is full of, incompletion, and not just incompletion, but also, there's an inbuilt paradox in this medical voice. There's an inbuilt, fault line in this medical voice. So he talks about manic depression, and then he clubs depression with things which are automatically and even normally despicable, right? So you're manic depressive. Yes, sir, perhaps I am. And again, Yossarian's response is very, very good. Don't try to deny it. I'm not denying it, sir, said Yossarian, pleased with the miraculous rapport that finally existed between them. I agree with you with all that you said. Then you admit that you're crazy, do you? Crazy? Yossarian was shocked. What are you talking about? Why am I crazy? You're the one who was crazy. Major Sanderson turned red with indignation again and crashed both fists down upon his thighs. Calling me crazy, he shouted in a spluttering rage. It's a typically sadistic and vindictive paranoid reaction. You really are crazy. So again, look at the way and sort of hold on to some loose terms, some very shallow signifiers. As you're vindictive, you're paranoid, you're sadistic, etc. These are terms which are medically used in a very loose way. But then it's quite clear that Major Sanderson over here seems to be more fragile and more infuriated more easily, more pushed, more anxious over here, much more than Yossarian is. So the moment he's called crazy, the moment he's called insane, his anger, his resentment, his response is more violent, which obviously is reflective of the fact that maybe he is quite fragile in his mind. Maybe he needs help. Maybe his mental health is not good. It's worse than Yossarian at many levels. So why don't you send me home? And I'm going to send you home because, again, remember, the idea of going home is something of a liberation for Yossarian as well. But at the same time, he wants to stay during the war in this hospital because he's being waited upon. He's been taken very well care of. And if you remember the very opening of the sentence of the novel, where there's a dilemma about Yossarian's liver, whether it is jaundice or not, whether if there's jaundice, he'll be treated, but there's no jaundice. But at the same time, the doctors don't even know if he doesn't have jaundice, so they can't send him home or go back to the war either. Okay, they're going to send me home, Yossarian announced jubilantly as he hobbled back into the ward. So again, this becomes almost a liberation. He wants to go home, he doesn't want to go back to the war front. Me too, our fortiori rejoiced. They just came to my ward and told me. What about me? Dunbar demanded petulantly of the doctors. You? They replied with asperity. You're going with Yossarian, right back into combat. And back into combat they both went. Yossarian was enraged when the ambulance returned him to the squadron, and he went limping for justice to Doc Deneka, who glared at him glumly with misery and disdain. So instead of sending him home, they send him back to the combat, and obviously he resents them for it, and Dunbar goes along with Yossarian. You, Doc Deneka exclaimed mournfully with accusing disgust, the egg-shaped pouches under both eyes firm and censorious. All you ever think about is yourself. Go take a look at the bomb line if you want to see what's been happening since you went to the hospital. Now, at this point in this novel, the idea of war comes, again, to a lot of black humor, a lot of dark humor. And the way war is represented over here, the difference between winning and losing blurs away. Winning is not necessarily a good thing, losing is not necessarily a bad thing. And then, we find that the whole spectacle of war has been parodied through different paradoxes. So this is one of the scenes in a novel where the real war is brought to the fore. It's not just people talking about the war in the hospital, but people at the battleground talking about it from a very close perspective. And Dr. Deneka over here is trying to give an overview to Yossarian in terms of what had happened when ever since he went away. Yossarian was startled. Are we losing? Losing, Dr. Deneka cried. The whole military situation has been going to hell since we captured Paris. And this is, again, funny, because Yossarian is anxious if they're losing or not, but what Deneka would tell him is that we are winning, and that is the problem, because Germans are retreating, and the war is going to be over very, very soon, and something worse might befall us. So we would continue the war to carry on. We would like the war to continue, to carry on for a while, because, as long as the Germans are fighting, we have something to do. As soon as the war is over, they will send us somewhere worse. So again, the whole reality of war over here is very different. It's obviously very de-glamorized. There's no heroism over here at all. There's a lot of cynicism. There's a very cynical view of the war, and also the whole idea of war as some kind of a futile enterprise. One war will end, some other war will begin at some other front. So you may as well continue this war, and that seems to be the sentiment over here. But the major, the fundamental thing over here that we should be paying attention to is how winning and losing are not really notionally or conventionally consumed. So they have very different connotations, they have very different implications in this situation. So he says, Daneka says, the whole military situation has been going to hell ever since we captured Paris. So, you expect that they're losing. That's probably what is being said, but then you get something else different, entirely different. I knew it would happen. He paused, his sulking eye turning to melancholy, and frowned irritably as though it were all Yossarian's fault. American troops are pushing into German soil. The Russians have captured back all of Romania. Only yesterday, the Greeks in the 8th Army captured Rimini. So allies are winning, So this seems to be the condition, and yet we have a sense of consternation and resentment and despise and loathing about this. The Germans are on the defensive everywhere. Dr. Daneka paused again and fortified himself with a huge breath for a piercing ejaculation of grief. There's no more Luftwaffe left. Luftwaffe is a German aircraft, the German air fight. There's no more Luftwaffe left. The Germans are retreating everywhere. He wailed. He seemed ready to burst into tears. The whole Gothic line is in danger of collapsing, right? So the Gothic line is obviously the German line, and that's a very strange description, but Gothic is supposed to be some kind of implication of vampiric, and that seems to be the sort of German condition, the German face, and that is retreating, the collapsing, and that is a bad thing. And when Yossarian said, so what is wrong, and what seems to be the problem? If this is what the condition is, it basically means we are winning the battle, we're winning the war. The Allies are winning, the Germans are retreating, the Russians are pushing them back, and the Americans are pushing them back. So, what's wrong? Dr. Daneka cried. If something doesn't happen soon, Germany may surrender, and they will all be sent to the Pacific, right? So Germany will surrender very soon. If something doesn't happen, that's going to be a disaster for us. So this is a point where we realize that a real war, has a very different kind of dynamic for people to actually fight the battle. So for an outsider, winning and losing are very fundamentally black and white things. There's a very clear difference between the winner and the loser, but for someone who fights a war, for someone who is a professional soldier, it really has very different kind of implications. So when the Germans lose very soon, if the Germans surrender very soon, he says we'll be sent to the Pacific, where a worse fate might await us. Yossarian gawked at Dr. Daneka in grotesque dismay. So again, the word grotesque is important over here, because the word grotesque is connected to carnivalesque. So grotesque is a kind of humor as well. So it's a misshaped humor. It's a humor which is not innocent at all. It's a very politically incorrect humor. Sometimes it's a violent humor. Sometimes it comes at the cost of something else. But the fundamental characteristic of grotesque humor is the misshaped quality, right? Something which has a very poor shape, and that shapelessness of the humor is it often has a very close proximity to death, to loss, to pain, to suffering, etc. So that is the grotesque quality of the humor, something which is always very close to loss and suffering and pain, and sometimes death as well. So grotesque dismay. Are you crazy? Do you know what you're saying? Yeah, it's easy for you to laugh, Dr. Daneka sneered. Who the hell is laughing? At least you've got a chance. You're in combat and might get killed. But what about me? I've got nothing to hope for, right? So again, look at the paradox over here. This almost, and this is a point in the story where we know that the comedy which comes out of this is actually a very, very deep-seated tragedy. It is so tragic that it doesn't have a tragic voice anymore. So people who die in the war are being envied. Right, so this is what Daneka is saying. At least you have a chance of getting killed, and that'll be like liberation for you. You're in combat. You can just go in the air, and someone can shoot you down, and in the process you get killed. So that's the end of it. What about me? I've got nothing to hope for. So, in a certain sense, this comicality also has a Sisyphean quality. So those of you who know the myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus, Sisyphus. So the myth of Sisyphus is basically an archetypal story about futility. Someone is doomed, Sisyphus in this case, someone is doomed to push a stone on top of a hill, and the moment the hill reaches the top, the stone sort of rolls down, and again the person has to push it all over again, and this just continues ad infinitum. There's no liberation, there's no end to it, right? And this Sisyphean quality is something which is highlighted over here, right? So I'm just going to continue this war forever, this endlessness of war, the ennui of war, the boredom of war. You're out of your goddamn head, Yossarian shouted at him emphatically, seizing him by the shirt front. Do you know what? Now keep your stupid mouth shut and listen to me. Dr. Necker wrenched himself away. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I'm a licensed physician, right? So again, the fact that he's a licensed physician is brought to the forefront. And again, I mean, we are, like Major Sanderson, we see here this person, Necker, who is some kind of doctor in the camp. He is more in need of treatment. He's more in need of therapy. So he says, I'm just a doctor, so I'll stay here forever. I'll go on curing mad people, mad soldiers. And in the process, my mental health will just go to pieces, fall to pieces. But at least you are a soldier, you can get killed, and there'll be an end to it. There'll be a closure to that. But I have no closure. I mean, I'm just going to go on forever. If this war ends, they'll send me to the Pacific, where the conditions of soldiers are worse, and I may have to treat them, right? So again, we see how these licensed physicians, they sort of end up becoming more mentally unstable. They end up becoming people who need more help, more therapy. Okay. So I'm a licensed physician. Don't keep your stupid licensed physician mouth shut and listen to what they told me at the hospital. I'm crazy. Do you know that, right? So I am being classified as a mad person. So really crazy. So I'm nuts, cuckoo. Don't you understand? I'm off my rocker. They sent someone else home in my place by mistake. They've got a licensed psychiatrist up at the hospital who examined me, and that was his verdict. I'm really insane. So Yossarian was puzzled by Dr. Necker's inability to comprehend. Don't you see what that means? Now you can take me off combat duty and send me home. They're not going to send a crazy man out there to be killed, are they? Who else will go? Right? So this is the ending of this chapter 27, and it's a very telling kind of an ending. First of all, Yossarian says that, someone told me, a licensed physician in the earlier account told me I'm crazy, so you just have to corroborate it. So he's addressing this to a doctor, Dr. Necker. He says, just write me a letter classifying me as a mad person so that they can send me home, because they won't send a mad person to fight in a combat, right? I mean, that technically is not possible. That technically is not permissible medically. But the doctor's response is very telling and very dark. He says, who else will go? Who else apart from a mad person will go and fight a combat and be in a battlefield? Now that obviously shows that the whole spectacle of war, the whole event of war, the whole process of war is a mad process, is an insane, irrational process. So you have to be, the very fact that you're here in the first place means you're irrational by default, right? So the whole process is crazy. So if you look at the adjectives Yossarian had used before, I'm cuckoo, so I'm nuts, I'm cuckoo, I have just been, losing my grip over things, etc. And then, that seems to be the problem, so send me home because, I can't fight a war. And the doctor's response is, because you're all that, you're here in the first place, right? Because the whole war is fought on that irrational impulse. It's not a rational war. No war is rational. And the fact that we are fighting this war, spending millions and millions of money on this, spending lives, slaughtering people, slaughtering property, all for what, right? So the purposelessness of it has been pointed out by a doctor. Now, this novel about the military medicine, because there are figures, as you can see, who embody the military medical figures. They so embody that figure of authority. But unlike Mrs. Dalloway, where they retain authority, they're civilian doctors, they profess things, they dictate things, they give orders, etc. The military doctors, they are in need of help. They seem to be completely cracked up. They seem to be completely deconstructed. They seem to be completely unsettled by the trauma that they consume every single day. So again, there's a very logical reversal of the therapist and the person who is undergoing therapy, right? Now, the doctor over here says, only a crazy person will go, only a cuckoo will go, only a mad person will go to the line of combat. So obviously we can't send you home because, the fact that you're here and you're still alive and you're mad makes you all the more eligible to go. So madness sanity and insanity, they become very different categories in this novel. They almost consume each other till the point comes to no one is really sane. Everyone is insane in different degrees. So insanity cannot be liberation anymore. Insanity will actually push someone. Insanity will sort of qualify someone to fight this combat, because the entire combat, the entire battle, the entire war is a spectacle of insanity, a spectacle of irrationality. And that is being constantly commented on in this novel to different kinds of ways, just mock serious ways, tragic comic ways, dark comic ways. But, at the end of it all, the bottom of it all is, infinite, endless human suffering to such an extent that it cannot really have a tragic voice anymore. It must just produce some kind of a pseudo-comicality to convey itself, to communicate itself, because even the luxury of tragedy is denied to them. Even the right to be tragic is denied to them. Even the grandeur of tragedy is denied to them. I mean, such is the exhaustion, such is the hollowness of these people. So we'll just stop at this point today. It's a very telling section. It's a very important section of the novel. That's why we chose it. And we read this in some details. We'll continue with a different section in the subsequent session. Thank you for your attention.